two professors I have on, so I know I'm going to learn a lot. I appreciate you both being here. Let's just start with the election that we had Tuesday. I know off-year elections, people say, oh, they don't mean that much. I still think they do, because it's still our best way for people to be heard. And we're always surprised on Election Day, because we don't know what people are thinking. It tells us a lot. Democrats got their ass kicked. It was called a woke lash in the media. Some of the places in Buffalo, a socialist named India Walton was alone on the ballot. Republicans did not even run anybody against her. She won the primary. Tells you a lot about how our system works. In the primary, she won among the Democrats. Alone on the ballot, lost to the write-in candidate who was the former Democratic mayor. In New Jersey, my home state, Steve Sweeney, the #2 most powerful politician in the state, lost to Ed Durr, a truck driver who spent, well, I've read $153, I've read $2,000, but not a lot, shot the campaign ad on his phone. Sounds like an Adam Sandler movie. And in Virginia, they lost all, this is a state Biden won by 10 points. They lost they lost the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, the state house. When Republicans lose, they always say, well, you have to do an autopsy. So what's the autopsy on the Democrats?
It's a center-right country, as Joe Manchin says. The Democrats have overplayed their hand. McAuliffe thought that by using the phrase racist dog whistle, he could rebut a legitimate argument from parents concerned about the way in which racial issues were being taught to their children. He was wrong. To me, the most interesting thing about Virginia is that that issue could make the difference in the outcome of the race. It would necessarily weigh against McAuliffe, but how is it that it made the difference in the outcome of the race, to which I attribute the general weakness of the leadership of the Democratic Party? I'm talking about President Joseph Biden, who's something less than an absolutely compelling and charismatic figure.
Well, we knew that going in.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I agree with Professor Loury about the total consequence, but clearly in the interim, yeah, it was, I don't know if it's quite the Obama shellacking during his first midterm, but I think it's more of a mixed message, because India Walton, of course, did, as you say, ran unopposed. The Democratic mayor, who was already suffering because he handled poorly the aftermath of the George Floyd protests and the economic recovery of the Buffalo Renaissance. He took her for granted. He blew her off. He wouldn't even debate her. All right, and then he got involved.
It's a small potatoes one. Let's talk about the big one in Virginia.
But even with Buffalo, the point is that it was not a referendum on whether a Democratic socialist could govern, because she spoke to the issues of the people. When you think about Virginia, dare I say that, yeah, you don't have Trump to beat up on. Maybe one of the lessons was Trump is not a good whipping boy or sufficient as a whipping boy to get you elected.
I think that's definitely true.
But what's interesting is Trump has been displaced and therefore distributed, because now you don't need Trump involved. It's like Deus Ex Machina. He's the ghost in the machine. The point is that parents who were spooked by critical race theory, none of whom can define it. When you ask them what it is, they don't know. But what they do know is that black people are being centered. Their history is being taken seriously. And if you say you're concerned about history in America, why is it that when it comes to black history, it becomes a bet?
But I find that a disingenuous argument, because I don't think that is what people are objecting to. I don't think most people, and of course there are some places in this country where they will, and some people who will, but they're not objecting to black history being taught. There are other things going on in the schools. Can we just, like separating children by race and describing them as either oppressed or oppressor? I mean, there are children coming home who feel traumatized by this. That's what parents are objecting to.
You do know that the beginning, and I know Professor Loury knows that, the beginning of critical race theory in the modern times is 2 years ago. Christopher Rufo, a white guy who said, look, I'm reading the anti-racist literature. I see this critical race stuff. This stuff will make good publicity, and he began to drive it home. It's not critical race theory. It's the notion of centering black people as historical agents. And the question is, if you talk about white kids being traumatized, oh, really? So that black kids being made to portray slaves? I mean, we got stories on both sides. I do think you're underestimating the anti-black sentiment that's deeply entrenched, that's way beyond Trump, which is troubling to me. It ain't just Donald Trump,
Well,
it's the party itself.
What do you?
Well, first of all, it's American history that we're talking about. And the question is, in what register do we tell the story about American history? Blacks don't have a separate history from America.
Absolutely.
Secondly, I just have to observe, Buffalo, New York, socialism, I mean, this is the Rust Belt. This is working class, white, hard hat on the east side of Lake Erie, Buffalo, New York. Socialism? How did you ever think socialism was going to sell in Buffalo, New York? Thirdly, they do this every time. By they, I mean the activists on the left who want to push the woke canon. They deny that what I see with my lying eyes is actually what I'm seeing with my lying eyes. I don't have to be able to parse what Derek Bell or Kimberly Crenshaw might have written in a law review to know that the race issue has come into the classroom because of what has happened in the aftermath of George Floyd and all of that.
Right.
Defund the police? Come on. Defund the police when crime is going up, when homicide is through the roof, when people are feeling unsafe in their communities. And then people say, well, no, we didn't really mean defund the police. We just meant rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. So I think they underestimate the determination of the American people to resist a certain kind of interpretation of the story about the country. There's many different ways of telling that story, and we African Americans are going to have to come into some understanding with the rest of the country about how we tell the story together.
Let me say that's fascinating. I agree with you that black history is American history if America realized that, right? The reason there's a segregated Black History Month is because there's been the kind of alienation of the narrative of black people's participation in the American story. The necessity for then highlighting, underscoring, and spotlighting black people has been precisely because we've not been seen as American. It started with Thomas Jefferson when he said that black people are unloyal citizens in the Declaration of Independence and that indigenous people were savages. My point is simply this. To believe that the critical race theory, it's not a debate, right? They're not debating Kimberly Crenshaw or Derek Bell. They're debating the fact that finally, if we look at the textbooks have been doing a horrible job of trying to educate our kids about race. So here's the thing. If critical race theory is getting it so wrong and, oh, let's go back to a time in history where we taught history right. The history textbooks that gave slavery 1 week, Martin Luther King Jr. a day, and that's it. So it's not as if what was prevailing before critical race theory was a controversial subject, was a complete and thorough engagement and vetting of black people in history. I say let's have it as American history, but acknowledge us.
Why does that have to be one? It's like you make it so polar. I mean, like
I'm not making it polar, Bill. I'm recognizing.
No, but you're saying we have to go back to when they only taught the
No,
word?
this is no. The textbooks are being produced now. I'm not talking about some way back in the day. I'm saying right now they don't even recognize the full complement of identities, conflicts, and tensions that black people participated in along with Americans, other Americans, to make this nation. That's all we're talking about. Give the drummer some.
Well, that's not all we're talking about. We're talking about kids who seem to be too young sometimes to fully appreciate all this. I think if they watched you, they probably wouldn't know a lot of those words. You know, so to ask them to, as opposed to just letting kids be kids, maybe, where usually kids are pretty nice to each other if they're not instructed not to be.
Well, I've got a book coming out in May that's called Unequal that's directed toward teens. They understand every word in there. I take your
Teens
point.
do, yes,
Kids
but we're talking about younger
kids
than
in the
that.
future. We need to be getting beyond race, frankly. We're in the 21st century, not the 19th century. Look at the intermarriage rates. Look at the number of Americans who understand themselves to be multiracial. Look at how the country is changing. There are more Hispanics by far than there are blacks. The Asians are here and they are continuing to come. We have to look at what we're going to be as a country down the road. This young generation should not be being put into boxes as black and white. They should be allowed to do what comes naturally, which is cross the lines.